Hello, this is Alex coming at you from beautiful downtown Pasadena, California, the land of cranky cranes and tanky tanks. Um, this is the most disgusting hotel I've ever stayed in my life, which is saying a lot because I have a high threshold for tolerance of uncleanliness. Um, and also a very low threshold of tolerance for cost. Um, so I could say that there may be two other hotels I've stayed in my life that are like legitimately more gross or dirty or menacing than this one. Um, but those would be like in the mid aughts when I was poorer. so, obviously more willing to take the gamble on getting a crappier place before there were smartphones, before you could really like sort of do some background research. So what I'm saying is this is a bad place. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot since being here in Southern California about I guess the way people on the left think about like political and social change. I've definitely recognized that like over the course of my like involvement and political activism or organizing of various kinds, whether that's through unions or that's through electoral campaigns, that my sort of leaning, probably, or my affinity, has always been toward people who are more on the anarchist side of things. I think that derives from just a historical experience of being involved in mainstream democratic liberal political organizing, things that might be more associated with the socialist or communist left side of things, in a country where, even saying the word socialist or communist is kind of like disqualifying to some extent, or has been. But still, like, we have had a socialist or communist or green, like, left in this country for a long time, since the mid to late 19th century, I guess. You've seen things like Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party in the early 20th century that never came within striking distance of attaining mainstream political power. But, Eugene Debs absolutely got more votes than any Socialist Party candidate in American history. Ran for president from prison, which is extremely based. But still was, under, it might be above 10% of the vote, but I think it's probably less. I can't remember. I'll have to check on that. But did not do as well as Ross Perot, who was running as a Reform Party candidate in 1992 and 1996. Probably the most successful third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt with the Progressive Party, right? So two weird rich guys who just started parties out of their own personal vanity did better than a Socialist Party candidate. Again, I'm going to have to check those numbers, but I think you get kind of my point, right? It's like the most persuasive and compelling Socialist Party candidate in U.S. history did about as good as or less good than just two weird, rich eccentrics, which, let's be honest, that's what TR and Ross Perot both were. That's complicated. TR's political trajectory is complicated, from being a rich establishment Republican to being a progressive firebrand in some sense. Ross Perot's extremely idiosyncratic and weird um, voyage from being a computer salesman to being a right-wing populist, I guess I would describe him as. If you hear some of his ideas about how to deal with dealing with crime in the early 1990s, very interesting. But I think, the story of Perot has not been told enough. It's not been unpacked. It's not been pieced apart because it just doesn't fit into these mainstream narratives of oh, well, there was Bush, there was Clinton, there's Democrats, Republicans, Newt Gingrich. But there was Perot, who just represented something that didn't quite fit into the categories economically nationalistic, protectionist, I think would be fair to say, against NAFTA, which credit him for that. Something that doesn't get discussed because it doesn't really fit into the categories that mainstream political pundits do, whether they're on the right or the left, whether it's Katrina vanden Heuvel from The Nation, or she's probably more likely to understand this than others, but it still doesn't quite slot into the way that people want to talk about it. It's you're for free trade or you're against free trade, or you're for the left or you're for the right, or it has to be that. And it's well, there's this other thing that's conservative and nationalistic and against free trade. That ended up, spoiler alert, I don't want to ruin the story for the boys and girls, but ended up becoming Trump. Because there was a thing that Obama and Hillary and Mitt Romney and Marco Rubio were not willing to say. This came out in the 2008 primary contest because both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were trying to get the nomination, and they tried to outgun each other on saying they were against NAFTA, a thing that her husband passed, and a thing that he was too young or not involved in politics to have anything to do with. So it's I'm against this thing. Obama saying that it's with the Iraq War. It's well, yeah, it's easy to say you were against it when you were in office or in a position to have an important opinion about it. So both Hillary and Obama were trying to say that they were the most against NAFTA. And one of Obama's advisors, Austin Goolsbee, the economist, sort of accidentally said out loud, yeah, we're just saying this shit. Nobody actually believes this. Basically saying, I think to Canada or Mexico or something yeah, don't worry. To the CEO of Tyco Corporate or whatever. Yeah, we're saying all this shit for these rubes, but obviously we're not going to hear it now. Come on. So I think that it's very interesting to look back and think that there's a strain of American politics that has been comprehensively not acknowledged or interpreted or analyzed because it doesn't fit with the left-right, Democrat-Republican, globalist, anti-globalist. I don't know. Even that word globalist is something that they wouldn't want to talk about in the discourse. So I'm just thinking about this because I have a lot of sympathy with people who are skeptical of NAFTA, skeptical of quote-unquote free trade, global capitalism, and liberalization, or however you want to put it. Theoretically, both American parties were kind of on board for this until relatively recently. Now both the Democrats and Republicans seem to be a little bit confused about it. One, because the Democrats on their side have labor, and labor's never really been on board with the free trade agenda. But the Democrats' business sponsors are absolutely on favor with it. And on the right side, the Republicans, because the entire Chamber of Commerce infrastructure that is the Republican establishment for the most part, is mostly in favor of it. And then you have some like nationalistic, in some ways xenophobic or jingoistic elements in the Republican Party that are against it. So both of them are like having a real hard time like moving this like frozen turd across like the hot plate. It's like it's like that weird Canadian sport curling. They're like moving a frozen turd across a hot plate with like a little shovel, and they're like, I don't know where to put this. That's what it seems like to me. Anyway, getting back to the point. To me, like, it seems that the history of the left in the United States has like not been great, to put it mildly. But there is a persistent demand among people who want more integrity and autonomy and independence in their workplace and a greater degree of economic security, an ability to not be at the whims and the caprice of someone who owns a lot of property or owns a business or has a lot of money or is your boss, or like there's a deep American conviction that you don't want to be under the thumb of someone else. This has taken the form of people's obsession with guns. It's taken the form of people's obsession with entrepreneurship and free market kind of things. But like people want to not be under someone else's thumb and have some independence, dignity, autonomy. That's a big part of our culture, even though it doesn't always get expressed in a left-wing direction. I mean, like most of the time it doesn't really, but like that is very core to the 8 hours for what we will kind of spirit and ethos of the labor movement and socialist politics and the left in general, including the Communist Party in its heyday, probably of like the 30s, right? Or the New Left in the 60s, like the idea of participatory democracy, that people take ownership and control of their workplaces. I have a friend, Professor Kate Rosenblatt, who's written a book about the history of cooperatives in America, like economic co-ops, which are like a much bigger part of the economy than like people probably would think. When they think co-op, they think like a bunch of annoying people in Park Slope. Fair enough. But what Rosenblatt points out is that, like, actually, if you look at the economy, there's, like, huge amounts of co-ops in all kinds of different industries, like agriculture and so forth. So this alternative economic model that you might associate with, like, the Populist Party, the People's Party in the in the 1890s, is not that, like, out of the bounds. Like, it's actually very visible and present, except to the extent that it's invisible and we don't see it. It's like, it's all around us. So anyway, when you have a chance to read Rosenblatt's work, I would recommend it. So, I guess what I've been thinking about since I've been here is that, you know, to me, the anarcho-syndicalist or anarchist movement has always been the one that I'm most interested in, that seems to speak to my own priorities or goals the most, the kind of model. I can't remember. Michael Parenti. I'm totally blanking on this right now. But during the 90s and 2000s, there was this idea of participatory economics, or Paragon, which was trying to map out kind of an anarcho-syndicalist model of how to organize the economy. There'd be like groups of producers, there'd be groups of consumers, and they would negotiate to distribute the things that people need. You grow corn, and there's like a group of corn farmers that like have a union essentially, and then that union negotiates with the union of the corn consumers, or the city that buys the corn for their residents, and that this is all very sort of flat and decentralized, and there's as little top-down hierarchy as possible. These were some of the ideas that these folks were mapping out as a way forward for the left, sort of after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the collapse of the big model of sort of command economy, top-down state socialism, or as some people would say, state capitalism. I've always had an affinity for that. Like, it seems like when like somebody like Noam Chomsky talks about being a libertarian socialist, this is that combination of freedom and equality that we're looking for, where it's like people have autonomy, people are not subject to the whims of other people, who's like a boss or a landlord or whatever, slave owner, you know. But also, like, there's this freedom element, and then there's also this equality element, where like we have a system that distributes resources in a way that is equitable and efficient and beneficial to the largest number of people, and that is not just about like some sort of game theory bullshit about like how do we maximize the profit for this sort of end of unending growth, unending capital accumulation, like for some other reason. So I feel like the anarchist movement has been sort of in the resurgence in America in recent years. I might find it hard to prove that, but that's just been my impression. I think people are really thinking about like other ways of doing mutual aid and cooperative economics. I think that it comes back to the original like questions that people had about like command style communist economy, or just the idea of communism, period. Which is like, yeah, I mean, of course it would be great if everybody had everything they needed. That would be wonderful. But because of Adam Smith and other people, we have this idea that, or Hobbes, or really just that, like, this system, this capitalist system is best because it channels people's bad instincts and bad motives in a constructive direction that produces a lot of value and a lot of, like, commodities. And it takes a bad situation and makes a good situation out of it, which is that like people are selfish, people are nasty, people are brutish, and they're lazy. And so the way to channel that is to create a system that incentivizes people to be productive and cooperative, which is supposedly what capitalism is. I think that the biggest critiques that people have of communism, and I think these are not like sophisticated, I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm saying like this is kind of intuitive to a lot of people in American culture, which is that like if there's a communist system, then there are two big problems. One, people will be lazy. People will just instinctively ratchet down their level of effort if they don't feel like they're going to lose their job, or there's a boss snooping over their shoulder, like policing and monitoring them all the time. I think a lot of people really do believe that, and I do too to some extent. But like, so communism sounds like a great idea, but like there will be a shortage of everything because people will just be lazy. And then B, number two, the other one, is that communism will consolidate lots of power in the hands of a handful, like a few, like Bolsheviks, a few Lenins or Trotskys or Stalins, who are covetous of their power and, you know, nasty and brutal. And once there's not like a balance of power between, say, businesses and consumers, or cops and suspects, or, you know, this very like Montesquieu kind of thing, that there needs to be a balance of powers. Once that is lost, then there's one little clique of people, like a mafia, that, like look at Russia, right? A mafia of people who just have power and will be totally ruthless in defending it. So I feel like those are the two concerns. People are lazy and people are ruthless and covetous of power. Those are the two reasons why communism would not work, I think. I think that's how a lot of people on a gut level, especially in the United States, in America, think about it. So you have to tackle those two problems. And I think that it is possible to have an arrangement where you could deal with both of those. And I do think that, like, anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist, syndicalist kind of like approach could take out the lust for power part by decentralizing power. And I think we could also, the laziness part is a little bit harder to deal with because that's more of like a cultural ideal or disideal, I guess. That like people don't want to be productive, people don't want to be useful. I think they do. Now, work is hard and unpleasant a lot of the time, but people still get something out of it. So I think if you could handle both of those pieces, then there would be a possibility of seeing a system that would fit well with what I think a lot of our sort of unspoken ideals as Americans are, which is independence, autonomy, freedom, freedom of association, but also equity and fairness and collaboration. Like, that's what we want. I think we have the tools to do it. And so that's just something I've been thinking about a lot. Like, most of the people from the beginning of my like involvement in activism, and into like more recently with the pandemic and our organizing for mutual aid to try to sort of spontaneously and non-hierarchically collect resources and distribute them to people who need them. The elderly, the ill, people who are unhoused. Those are things that fit very well with an anarchist model. And so, I don't know. I'm really hoping that there's more of a prospect for this. And I do think there's a demand and interest. I think that Occupy Wall Street had some elements of that. I think that a lot of our movements, like Black Lives Matter, have had elements of like a affinity-based, decentralized model. And that's what I would really like to see more of. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts from beautiful, disgusting Pasadena, California. All right. Thanks for listening. All right, bye.